China is in the midst of a construction spree unparalleled in human history. Over the course of just 40 years, the Chinese will be adding a layer of infrastructure that will rival what we in the United States have built in our entire past. These are the mega projects that will lift China into the future. China wants to make its capital, Beijing, the center of the world's largest supercity by merging 3 provinces into one continuous megalopolis of 130 million people. That's 6 times the population of New York. The region is called Jing-Jin-Ji, and it'll tie together the cities in 3 provinces along the Bohai Bay Rim, using advanced communications networks, new high-speed rail and subway lines, and better highways. Reports are that Beijing's focus will be culture and technology, Tianjin will become a research base for manufacturing, and Hebei will be the new home of many of the federal bureaucracy jobs that will be relocated from the capital. The project has the full backing of President Xi Jinping to catch the area up to China's more economically prosperous regions, like what Shanghai and Nanjing have got going on in the Yangtze River Delta. Covering roughly the total land area of the US state of Kansas, Jing-Jin-Ji will be unlike anything seen before in the history of mankind. And even though it's still a work in progress, part of a long-term vision, that's not stopping people from moving into areas that are completely unready for them. The services are bad, says a salesman who commutes a total of 5 hours a day on congested roads. His 6-year-old child has more than 65 kids in his class. They live in Yanjiao, one of the many tower-filled suburbs that are sprouting up all across Jing-Jin-Ji. Yanjiao has about 750,000 residents, but just 2 very small parks and no bus terminals. Why is this the case? Because corruption is perceived as rampant at the local level in China. The central government doesn't allow cities to keep the little tax revenues they do collect, so communities like Yanjiao have no way to pay for desperately needed schools, roads, or enough buses to adequately serve their citizens. The most vital piece of infrastructure that will help fix a lot of these problems is still being built: Jing-Jin-Ji's high-speed rail network. With trains that can hit 185 miles per hour, urban areas that were previously confined by the 60 miles per hour speeds of a car or subway or train can now greatly expand. All those people filling the megacities in the north have a shortage of the single most necessary resource for life: water. To solve that problem, the Chinese will soon be moving 45 billion cubic meters of fresh water each year from the wetter south to the drier north. There will be 3 canals in the project: a 716-mile-long eastern canal that will begin at the Yangtze River and snake uphill with the help of more than 20 pumping stations to reservoirs in Tianjin. Route 2 will flow downhill from the Danjiangkou Reservoir on the Han River, 785 miles across the North China Plain to Beijing. And the third route is the Big Western Line. It's still in its planning phase, but it will divert water from the rivers flowing into the Yangtze, sending it to the Yellow River instead. The central government has rammed this project through, despite many concerns over pollution and the forced relocation of hundreds of thousands of villagers. It's also late and over budget due to the soaring costs of building bridges and tunnels for the canals to cross the many rivers and highways in its way. Then there are the very real fears that diverting water from the Yangtze River could cause the world's 3rd longest river to run low, devastating those whose livelihoods depend on it. One proposed solution to this problem is to give the Yangtze more water by redirecting rivers in southwestern China. But this would affect India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, potentially causing an international crisis. For the immediate future, though, the South to North Water Transfer Project is a done deal. Following the example of the American West in the previous century, China has completely reshaped its environment using dams and canals, allowing for the arid North to support tens of millions more residents than it otherwise could. As the world's most populous country, it makes sense China would have the world's busiest airport. And when the Beijing Daxing International Airport opens in 2018, it will. With a maximum capacity of 130 million passengers a year, it will be significantly busier than the world's current busiest airport. To make this work, Beijing Daxing's main terminal will sprawl over 7.5 million square feet. Its unique starfish design was created by Zaha Hadid architects to, quote, provide an exceptional passenger experience with minimal walking and increased connectivity, end quote. The new mega airport could have as many as 9 runways, 8 for civilian use and 1 for the military, and will cover more than 6,600 acres in southern Daxing along its border with Hebei province. Construction will cost around $13 billion and will include a dedicated high-speed rail line to connect the airport to the rest of Beijing's transportation system. Beijing's existing Capital International Airport is already running well over capacity and has become the second busiest in the world, even though it just opened in 2008. So to ease congestion, it will stay open, providing the Jing-Jin-Ji supercity with 2 mega airports. But it's not just passenger congestion that makes it hard to fly in China. Some analysts say the root of the problem is that the military controls 80% of the airspace, which forces civilian aircraft to operate in narrow corridors, slowing them down. That's why flight delays are rampant throughout the country. But that's an issue China can and will fix, because it knows that while the 20th century was the century of the automobile, the 21st will be dominated by the airplane, especially once faster, more efficient aircraft are introduced, making it even easier and cheaper to get around our increasingly interconnected planet. The Chinese aren't just flying in record numbers, they're falling in love all over again with the preferred method of travel in the 20th century, as hundreds of millions of Chinese acquire middle-class status and the extra income to afford cars. This is presenting a relatively new challenge: heavy congestion on their motorways. So to tackle this problem, China has set itself apart from the rest of the world by embracing high-speed rail at a breakneck pace. Its goal, to build a system with more than 35,000 kilometers of track, is now more than half complete, making it one of the most expensive mega projects in history. The other reason behind this plan is to allow people to commute to work from much farther distances than they could if they had to drive, making high-speed rail the key to urbanization. And because China has as much high-speed rail as every other country combined, it will have more and more of the world's largest cities. In fact, of the top 10 urban areas on Earth with more than 20 million people, 3 of them are in China. And those cities are growing so fast that 2 of the 3 weren't in the top 10 last year. The explosion in high-speed rail in China is especially mind-blowing when you consider that it was first introduced there in 2007. That's less than a decade ago. Since then, daily ridership has grown from 237,000 to over 2.5 million. To accommodate all those passengers, its railway ministry has swelled and now has the same number of employees as there are civilians working for the entire United States government. China got to this point under the heavy-handed leadership of Minister of Railways Lu Zhijun, or Great Leap Lu, who pushed his patriotic workers in shifts around the clock to plan and build rail lines as fast as possible. He famously said, "To achieve a great leap, a generation must be sacrificed." Lu meant his workers, but when a poorly designed signaling system caused a dramatic crash on a viaduct high above a valley in 2011, it was clear that some of the first generation of passengers would be sacrificed as well.
China's railway system has been plagued with problems including corruption and quality concerns. Authorities have come under fire for the way they've handled the accident, especially when they buried several carriages before carrying out an investigation.
But despite the 40 deaths and more than 200 injuries in the Wenzhou train collision, the attempts of the government to cover the disaster up, and Great Leap Lu's subsequent fall from grace, the high-speed rail boom in China has roared on, and the system is now considered to be among the safest modes of transportation in the entire world. It also leads the globe in annual ridership, has the longest single service at 2,400 kilometers from Harbin to Wuhan, and has the fastest commercially operated train, with peak speeds of 430 kilometers per hour. Now, having successfully linked up much of its own country with high-speed rail, China aims to do the same for the rest of the world. It is building systems in Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and South America, and is bidding on projects in Russia, Brazil, Myanmar, and the United States. Now, for the most dangerous project on the agenda. The world's longest underwater tunnel will connect the cities of Dalian and Yantai across the Bohai Sea, passing through 2 deadly earthquake fault zones. At 76 miles long, it will be longer than the current first and second ranked underwater tunnels combined, and at a cost of $42 billion, it will be extremely expensive. But the Chinese calculate that it will be worth it. For one, it will slash the 8-hour drive between the two cities to under 2 hours. It will also connect China's isolated northern Rust Belt with its wealthy east coast, adding an additional $3.7 billion to the economy each year. The experience could also establish the Chinese as the preeminent submarine diggers in the world, and would be a serious practice run for far more ambitious potential future mega projects like connecting China to South Korea, or even Russia to the United States across the Bering Strait. Yes, that has actually been proposed. This isn't the first underwater tunnel project for Chinese engineers either, who already gained some experience by completing the 3.8-mile long Jiaozhou Bay Tunnel in 2011. But while the Bohai Sea is roughly the same depth as the Jiaozhou Bay, the tunnel underneath it will be 20 times longer. When it comes to construction, if they're lucky, the Chinese will encounter only soft seabed, allowing them to use tunnel boring machines the whole way. But if they run into harder rock, they're going to have to use the drill and blast method embraced by the Japanese during construction of the Seikon Tunnel. Using tons of dynamite hundreds of feet underwater is dangerous business, and it resulted in the unfortunate deaths of 4 workers over the course of that project, and many accidental leaks.
In 1976, the project hit its biggest crisis when 80 tons of seawater a minute began leaking in. 1.5 kilometers of tunnel flooded. It took 5 months to get back on track.
The Bohai Tunnel will also have to withstand magnitude 8.0 earthquakes. In 1976, the deadliest earthquake in modern history, a 7.8, killed a record 650,000 people in Tangshan and surrounding areas. In 1969, a quake measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale shook the Bohai Bay itself. And there doesn't seem to be much the engineers can even do about that threat besides simply reinforcing the strength of the tunnel walls. Of course, they could simply not bore a long hole under a deep bay through 2 fault zones, but that doesn't really seem to be an option at this point, because officials throughout China are under enormous pressure to hit GDP economic growth targets, and there aren't many other options that could provide anywhere near as much economic benefit as the Bohai Tunnel, which should break ground sometime in 2016. By now you're seeing the trend here. The world's biggest city, the world's longest canal, biggest airport, longest high-speed rail network, and underwater tunnel. So the fact that China is building the world's largest wind farm too shouldn't surprise you. The Gansu Wind Farm project will produce 20 gigawatts of power by 2020 and will cost nearly $20 billion to build. Turbines are going up at the staggering rate of 35 per day across the 3 areas that make up the power base. In 2012, Gansu's capacity surpassed the total wind-generated electricity produced by all of the United Kingdom, and it's just the largest of 6 mega wind farms currently under construction throughout China. But China isn't embracing wind just to reduce its carbon emissions. It's doing everything it can to simply keep the lights on. Some parts of the country, with booming middle-class populations, suffer persistent electricity shortages because, just like us, people want refrigerators, dishwashers, washer and dryers, and computers in their homes. But there's only so much energy to go around. So China's State Council is pushing for an across-the-board renewable strategy to reduce its dependence on oil, coal, and gas, the finite resources of the 20th century, whose extraction and consumption are subject to constant geopolitical tensions. Since 2013, China has led the world in renewable energy production, with a total capacity of 378 installed gigawatts, coming from projects as wide-ranging as Gansu to hydroelectric power plants like the Three Gorges Dam, which spans the Yangtze River and is the world's largest power station of any kind. In just the last 10 years, China has increased its solar panel production 100-fold to become the world's leading manufacturer of that technology. With China now pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere than the number 2 and 3 emitting countries, the US and India, combined, it's vital for the future of the planet that it continues using mega projects to create a lot more megawatts of clean, green power. Another answer is nuclear power. which is much less controversial in China because of its prodigious demand for electricity and the inability of its people to mount any real challenges to the government's plans. Mainland China currently has 31 nuclear power reactors in operation and another 24 under construction. Compare this to the United States, which has 99 commercial reactors overall, supplying about 20% of its electricity needs. However, the US currently has plans to build just 5 more reactors, as it's instead choosing to embrace natural gas, wind, and solar power. Even France, who leads the world by generating 3/4 of its electricity from nuclear, is moving away from the technology, and will likely close nearly half its nuclear power plants in the next decade. The Fukushima accident in Japan, after the devastating earthquake there, also accelerated the world's breakup with nuclear power, even causing China to briefly suspend new projects. But while the rest of the world turns its back on nuclear energy, China is doing the opposite, more than quadrupling its nuclear capacity by 2030. The Marquis project is the Haiyang nuclear power plant in Shandong province, which will eventually house 8 AP1000 Westinghouse pressurized water reactors for a total capacity of 8,800 megawatts, 4 times more power than is generated by the Hoover Dam, a power station that provides electricity for 8 million people in the American Southwest. And when you factor in that the average home in China uses a fraction of what an American home uses, the Haiyang plant will end up producing enough electricity for tens of millions of people. But the $13 billion project is only the most powerful of the 13 different nuclear power plants currently under construction across China, 9 of which will have a maximum capacity of more than 6,000 megawatts. Most are near large cities, where power is needed most, but this strategy raises concerns that if there were an accident, tens of millions of residents could be exposed to dangerous radiation. The neighboring Guangdong and Lingao nuclear power plants have 28 million people within a 75-kilometer radius, including Hong Kong. That's many more than the 8 million who live within 75 kilometers of the San Onofre nuclear generation station in Southern California. But the decision was taken in 2013 to shut the California plant down, after numerous safety concerns became known to the public, highlighting the opposite directions the two nations are heading in when it comes to nuclear power. The other issue China must deal with is how to dispose the many tons of radioactive waste it will be generating, which is always a contentious issue because no one wants that in their backyard. The current plan is for construction to commence in 2041 on a high-level waste repository site in the Gobi Desert. On the whole, the danger of a costly nuclear accident that China would pay for in both blood and treasure is fairly significant, but Beijing is apparently willing to live with that risk, judging by its unrestricted embrace of nuclear power. But these are tough choices, and it's important to keep in mind that in the age of climate change and ecological interconnectivity, nuclear power is still an infinitely cleaner alternative to burning coal. The final megaproject featured in our series perfectly highlights both China's ongoing struggle to maintain its unprecedented growth and the unbelievable ambition that's fueling its rise. A constant challenge for most big cities is that there's only so much land to build on. For Hong Kong and Shenzhen, two neighboring metropolises with a total population of nearly 20 million, the boundary it's running into is water, specifically the Pearl River Delta, which separates the uber-populated eastern corridor from the far lesser populated cities of Macau and Zhuhai on its western shore. Today, to get to Macau after landing at Hong Kong International Airport, you are faced with either a 4-hour drive around the mouth of the Delta or a long ferry ride through frequently rough waters. But that's about to change, thanks to a $17 billion 6-lane multi-part bridge that will cut the trip down to a 45-minute drive. It is an incredibly complex project and includes cost and construction sharing agreements between mainland China and its special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. Inspired by both the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel in the US and the Øresund Bridge that connects Denmark and Sweden, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge will not only have to withstand typhoons, but to avoid cutting off one of the world's busiest shipping routes into Hong Kong and its unusually deep natural harbor, it will plunge underwater as a tunnel. And at 28 kilometers, its longest stretch will be as if 15 Golden Gate bridges were lined up end to end to end to end. And that's not even the craziest part. Because Shenzhen doesn't want to be left out, It too will build a mega bridge across the delta, just a few miles to the north. Basically, the region is booming so fast, and competition to tap into the cheaper land and labor available on the western side is so great that Shenzhen and Hong Kong have both committed to building multi-billion-dollar mega bridges, and will essentially race to see who finishes theirs first. As you can see from a close look at the map, cities with populations totaling more than 40 million people surround the delta, thus revealing the master plan to lay the foundation for China's second megalopolis, an urban area that could eventually exceed 100 million residents. We started this video with Jing-Jin-Ji, and we're ending it with what I'm calling Hongguangzhang, two megalopolises, each serving as perfect bookends to our story of China. A country that is counting on infrastructure megaprojects like those we've profiled to serve as the foundation for its rapid urbanization. But how well it manages that urbanization will largely define whether it continues its ambitious rise for the rest of the 21st century. For TDC, I'm Bryce Plank. This has been another Daily Conversation original multi-part documentary. If you found the topic of China's addiction to mega projects as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and share it with your friends and followers. If you made it here to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Click on the on-screen annotations to enjoy the other mini documentaries I've made, like the future mega projects in the rest of the world, the most interesting energy sources of the future, the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or my take on the immigration history of the United States of America.